Counting calories is one of the most common behaviors that I notice amongst dancers. So much of a dancer's life feels out of their immediate control. Think about it, the success of an upcoming audition, placement classes. For some dancers, counting calories provides a seemingly harmless sense of control when so much feels out of control. But is it harmless, and should dancers count their calories? That's what we're going to be talking about today. Hi, I'm Rachel Fine. I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist working with dancers to help them learn how to utilize food in the most supportive way possible and not in a way that's restrictive. Today, we are back to talking about the topic of calories, but specifically around a behavior like counting calories and whether or not this behavior is something that can help dancers or hinder their performance. Striving for behaviors like calorie counting sometimes offers dancers an outlet, a sense of predictability and structure. This is especially appetizing for dancers who feel that so much of their career success is lying not on them, but on their directors and on their teachers. We know that the pitfalls of restrained eating patterns are twofold. And unlike what dancer diet culture promises us, these habits, like calorie counting, fail to support us in the long haul. Dancers need to steer clear of calorie counting, but sometimes it's hard to understand why. Let's break it down. As a behavior, calorie counting seems super benign. And as I mentioned, dancer diet culture is notorious for suggesting that this be an ideal method for dancers to manipulate their body weight, shape, or size in hopes to achieve their performance goals. I can't even tell you how many dancers have come to me thinking that they are doing something right by counting their calories each day. And that immediate gratification that they might experience when first starting out on these behaviors, maybe it's weight maintenance, maybe it's weight loss, whatever it might be, and especially if this is exacerbated with comments in the studio, specifically body-related compliments, then there's no doubt that dancers are going to take this behavior and run with it. But here's the first issue. With so many popular diets, eating plans, and even supposed wellness routines underestimating a dancer's calorie needs, calorie counting most often coincides with underfueling, not eating enough to support your body's metabolic and physical needs for dance. I'm going to say it loud and clear. Counting calories can be a gateway to disordered eating. In fact, 1 in 4 normal dieters eventually progress to a clinical eating disorder. And let's think about how this is exacerbated in the dance world because of the unfortunate saturation of body ideals and that overwhelming amount to either miscalculate anyone's calorie needs. But even for dancers who feel that their calorie counting habit is supporting them, I can assure you, and I've been working with dancers for a very long time as a dietitian, I can assure you that behaviors like calorie counting most always turn obsessive. Also, it takes away from the vast experiences in our lives and the role that food can play for us from an enjoyment and even cultural perspective. What can dancers lose or sacrifice when calorie counting? The joy of food, the mental space, the mindset to focus on your dancing, psychological well-being, the ability to trust oneself around food. So often we see dancers start to develop this distrust, this feeling of, I can't keep these foods at home because if I do, I will not be able to control myself around them. Dancers also lose a sense of regular hunger cues throughout the day. So they become so reliant on these external calorie counts that it becomes nearly impossible to listen and honor intuitive feelings of hunger, driving them further and further away from the ability to fuel their bodies more intuitively, which is hard in of itself because of a dancer's busy and active schedule. And the biggest one, relative energy deficiency in sport, a syndrome of negative complications that happen when a dancer experiences negative energy balance, not eating enough calories to support their increased level of activity. So for dancers who have already started the habit, how can they logistically drop it? It's way easier said than done, especially if you feel like that mental calorie counter is constantly ticking in your head. The more time you've spent calorie counting, the more time you're likely to spend having to unravel the thoughts and therefore behavior. In fact, for some dancers, embracing intuitive eating, so fueling our bodies based off of hunger cues and fullness cues and satisfaction cues, might not be nearly accessible, especially if coming from a place of severe regimented eating like calorie counting. So simply waking up one day and saying, I'm not going to count calories anymore, is not just impossible, but actually not encouraged, especially from a dietitian like myself. And the reason for that is because the longer you have been relying on that external calorie count, the more likely it is that you currently aren't going to be able to truly rely on your hunger cues, and therefore might even be at risk for continuing to underfuel or undereat throughout your day. So a few steps to consider. The first and foremost is that we want to start proactively. This one's pretty straightforward. If you are using a calorie counting app or a website or maybe even a watch, then you're going to need to proactively get yourself to either delete these items, or at the very least, I would suggest moving the app to another screen on your device so that it's a little bit less accessible, especially when that urge to check comes. Remember, the accuracy of pretty much any of these calorie counts is beyond inaccurate. They are not going to know the amount of calories that your body needs to function optimally. And this is especially true for a very active dancer, and one of the biggest reasons why time and time again I see dancers underfueling and putting themselves at a higher risk for injury. If you feel a little bit lost with the amount of calories that your body does need, then I encourage that you reach out. A licensed professional, a registered dietitian nutritionist can definitely help to pave the way to ensure that you have some bit of what I call calorie awareness, just to ensure that you are hitting a minimum baseline to meet your needs. My second suggestion is to be patient with the process. Stopping that mental calorie ticker, it's not about if, it's just about when. And I also mentioned that the time and effort that it takes to stop counting calories will be very dependent on how long you've been partaking in the behavior. The likelihood that you've lost the ability to trust your body's intuitive hunger cues goes up the longer you've been relying on these external counts. And before you can relearn how to truly support your body's energy needs with enough food in your meals and snacks, you also need to unlearn a lot of the messaging that comes alongside behaviors like calorie counting. I often encourage dancers to read my blog, dancenutrition.com, where I provide many articles to help you with learning about hunger and fullness cues, in addition to debunking a ton of misconceptions, especially around ingredients and macronutrients in our food. Articles on fat, on carbohydrates, and even on protein can help you to start building a stronger library of knowledge when it comes to putting together balanced and nourishing meals and snacks. The technique of proactive fueling, this is what the dancers in the Healthy Dancer are often working on, helps to also create a flexible eating routine that's going to ensure you're best supported without having to rely on that constant calorie count. Throughout this process, we really want to lean into compassionate curiosity. Remember, you weren't born calorie counting. It was a behavior that you likely pick up somewhere along your journey in hopes that it would help with your performance and your overall goals as a dancer. And at that time, it wasn't up to you to truly know the negative implications of that behavior. And if you did, then that's awesome. But still, the dieting mentality can be so loud that even when we acknowledge the negative implications of a dieting behavior, we might still partake in them. Journaling can be helpful. Guided prompts, such as the ones that I use within the Healthy Dancer, can help to reduce the urge, the need to want to know those numbers to calorie count, and even replace these behaviors with ones that are more supportive. Consider the pros and cons of calorie counting. Yeah, I know, the pros. Are there any pros that you can think of? That supposed feeling of control, that structure that so many dancers thrive with. However, restrained eating doesn't help us in the long run. In fact, the comfort that you're receiving from behaviors like calorie counting, it's fleeting. Calorie counting might even provide an outlet of hope, especially for dancers who do experience weight stigma in the studio. But we need to remember that restrictive dieting does not work for 98% of people, and for that 2% that it supposedly does work, most often these behaviors parallel those of an eating disorder, increasing your risk not just to burnout, but also physical injury down the road. Next up, I want you to start fact checking. So we spoke a little bit about this already, but as you work to both identify and dismantle the behavior of calorie counting and even those thoughts that are provoking you to want to calorie count, start to identify them. One of the most common thoughts that I see trigger dancers into behaviors like calorie counting is an overall fear of weight gain. Now, it is very true that everybody's body is going to respond differently to adequate nourishment. Simply put, when you're fueling your body with enough food throughout the day, you're allowing it to live at a weight that's genetically suited for you. We call this your set point weight. And trying to micromanage this weight is what often leads dancers to severely underfuel, increase their risk for injury, and eventually burn out from dancing in of itself. The anxiety of not knowing how your body will ultimately respond once you move away from behaviors like calorie counting is extremely valid. I encourage you to consider some neutral affirmations and, if needed, consult with a licensed mental health practitioner who can help you to build a toolbox of coping mechanisms as these fears and anxieties surface. Another consideration as we move away from calorie counting is starting to embrace intuitive eating. As I mentioned, this is often the hardest step because not every dancer is going to be ready to rely on their body's intuitive cues of hunger and fullness. But I do want you to remember that eating when hungry and stopping when full is not nearly the entirety of intuitive eating. Intuitive eating is a fundamental of the healthy dancer approach, and we utilize it to help us with dismantling dancer diet culture and recognizing the importance of baseline nourishment throughout our days. So remember, providing your bodies with some flexible structure in the form of meals and snacks throughout your day are helping to support its need for nourishment. Throughout this process, we want to build a deeper understanding of how our body is communicating its hunger to us, its fullness cues to us, and even its food preferences, what will satisfy us, and of course, what is accessible to us at any given moment. So it's about making food decisions not based on a calorie number, but rather what our body needs to feel energized and satisfied at that moment. Mindful eating techniques can also be super helpful in this work, helping you at your meal to slow down and take in more of the experience of eating. It's not always a practice that's accessible, especially when we're super busy, but when it is, it can be very helpful. So remember, breaking free from that relentless cycle of calorie counting is anything but easy, but eventually it's liberating. It allows you to build a more supportive and sustainable approach to how you're fueling your body for the long run. By dismantling that urge to count, you're allowing yourself to cultivate more body awareness and fully embrace the healthy dancer. Remember, nourishing our bodies doesn't only have to serve the purpose functionally to support our performance. Absolutely, that plays a role, but so does our food's role in supporting us mentally and emotionally. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion, and I hope that you're walking away with some tools to help dismantle that dieting mentality and unravel behaviors like calorie counting. But if you feel like you need more support, then reach out. As a registered dietitian nutritionist, I've got tons of resources that can help you in this work. Until next time, I'll talk to you soon.